Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of I Bought a Watch. So today I thought I was going to be doing an AliExpress video, but the watch has yet to arrive. But in its stead, a watch I've bought on eBay has. Now this was originally planned to be a video on what sort of watch you can get yourself on eBay, but it seems I've got on my hands a bit of a mystery antique piece. So I've done a little digging about, and I'll be sharing what I found and going over my initial impressions and specifications of this watch. Then hopefully by the time the AliExpress watch does arrive, I'll have a better idea of this watch's working condition. Before I go on with the episode, please do remember to hit that like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this in the future. And without further ado, here is the watch. Okay, here it is. Now, this is where I'd usually switch to some B-roll, but because I didn't really know anything about this watch to begin with, I was just working off first impressions. So let me go over those three first impressions with you. First is that vintage styling. This watch just screams 70s to me. That pillow-shaped case and the look of this ridiculously domed crystal. Just look at the level of distortion on that. Really shows off the quite frankly massive applied hour markers. Look at them standing tall over that lovely cream sunburst dial. Honestly, since I've got this watch, I've been just playing with it, trying to find the perfect angle to admire it from. Other than reminding me of a circle of seats in a glass-domed futuristic conference hall, the stepped hour markers are cut away nicely to allow that minute hand to gracefully move over the indices unobstructed, giving this watch, in my opinion, an extra sense of that precision engineering that goes into watchmaking. Now, secondly, I don't know if anyone had spotted, but either side of that 6 o'clock is the words Swiss made, which of course we all know, for the most part, is a sign of quality horology. Now that brings me on nicely to the final point, which of course was the price. Now I'm always looking for a bargain, so when I saw this one listed, I snapped it up as soon as I could, because a £20, that's right, £20 Swiss watch had got to be worth it. So before I answer that question outright, let's go over some of the history of this piece. So to start off with, I couldn't find anything on this watch. It was a complete mystery piece, with that M star on the dial and a 25 joule automatic Inca block movement on the inside. So this watch, to my best hypothesis, is a Montine of Switzerland watch. The watch company appears to have been fairly popular through the 60s to the late 80s, as there are loads of listings on places like eBay and Gumtree of similar models. Interestingly, the company seems to have gone through multiple brand names: Montine, Montine International, Montine of Switzerland, and a few other variations all floating around. What is most peculiar is that this company was re-registered in the UK in England on the 27th of April in 1978 by a pair called Crawley and Purley. Now this coincides, and possibly consequently, quite nicely with the quartz crisis of the 70s, which, as I've spoken about before, decimated the Swiss watch market, and is possibly why there is little to no record of Montine ever since. This is mainly speculation, so if you do know anything more about Montine or have a Montine in the collection, please do leave a comment below. Now, let's go over some of the specifications. So this watch has a case diameter of 35mm, a lug-to-lug of 41mm, and a lug width of 20mm. Although I must say it has a very odd floating bracelet attachment that I've never come across before or seen in a watch like this. And finally, the watch has a thickness of 12mm, but it does wear far slimmer, as it has approximately 3 to 4mm taken up by that domed crystal. The watch features a single screw down caseback, which lists off most of this watch's specifications. Automatic movement, stainless steel case and bracelet, anti-magnetic, Inca block referring to the shock protection system, water resistance, Swiss made, and what appears to be a reference number 524. Okay, let's move on to this fabulous retro dial. So as you can see, we have this off-white, almost champagne sunburst dial with that M star logo at the 12 and automatic Inca block 25 at the 6 o'clock. The watch has a simple set of baton hands, but they have a nice black inlay and a little bit of lume applied to those hand tips. The bold applied hour indices continue this black inlay in their step design, and each have a little pip of loom on the reverse, which I think really brings the whole piece together. There is a nice frame date window at the 3 o'clock, which is further framed by an internal beveled edge carved into that sunburst dial. The edge of the dial is surrounded by what appears to be a simple minute track, but on closer inspection, you can actually see that the markers differ in length as to not clutter the dial around those prominent hour markers. Framing the dial is a high polished chapter ring, which if you look closely when staring at it straight on, manages to reflect those impressive hour markers back at you, giving the dial an almost cogwheel look. The case features a nice beveling around the lugs, which gives the watch a slightly more elegant look. This is further helped by the way the lugs curve and the remarkably flat case back, giving the piece a close fit on any wrist. Saying that, the case is surprisingly substantial for a dressier piece, and for a 35mm watch, you can definitely feel this one on the wrist. This case will have been finished in a high polish at some point, however, over its life, it's amassed a multitude of scratches that personally I think add to the piece's mystery and story. The watch features a period-accurate stretched engineer's pressed bracelet, and like I showed earlier, it has those odd floating attachments, but still tapers from 18mm at the lugs to 12mm at that clasp. The clasp here is a very simple pressed design, which is unfortunately unsigned. It has a pretty standard fold over action and works good enough. As you can see, there are loads of levels of micro adjust on this one, which is great for finding the perfect fit, however not so great when you realize that there aren't any removable links in this bracelet. Alright, all that's left to do now is to pop this one on the wrist. And there it is. As you can see, it actually wears quite large considering it's a 35mm case diameter. And thanks to that incredibly flat case back and curved lugs, it actually sits really low on my wrist. On top of that, I have to say that even though this watch has a pressed bracelet, it hasn't at all been pulling out the hairs quite at the rate that I would have initially thought. I've got to say it again, the main thing about this watch is that domed crystal. It's just something else, isn't it? And I think the impressive vertical architecture of that dial really does add to make the distortion such a feature of the piece. That's something I've really noticed the longer I've had this piece, is how simple it appeared at first, but the closer you look at it, the more you realize the little touches like the minute markers tapering off near the applied hour indices, or the way they've matched the inlay and created cutaways on the hour markers, which, when lined up correctly, give the illusion that the minute hand seemingly extends to the edge of the dial. I was originally toying with the idea that I could call this episode Swiss-made Seiko 5, but actually, I think that would be doing Montine a disservice, as although Seiko are the current king when it comes to affordable, stunning dials, I believe, in this instance, Montine has dethroned them. Now, of course, I realize this watch isn't for everyone. Personally, I would even change up the case shape and make it more circular with thinner and slightly more elegant lugs. But one thing is for certain, this is a great way to spend £20 on a watch. Okay, well that does it for this episode. Sorry that there was a bit of delay between uploads. It was a mixture of late deliveries and new watches, and some misscheduling on my part. But as always, if you like what you've seen, like and subscribe, and I'll see you all again in the next episode.